Well, as Barry mentioned in his introduction, I am the president of a Community Development Strategy, CDS, you may have heard of us. We do market analyses, so our focus is how is the market working for land uses like housing? So we study housing a lot. We do work related to municipal utility districts, and so we really are in touch with the impact that MUDs have on the housing market and why they make the Texas housing market special and functional. So I want to just enumerate some of the major benefits that MUDs provide to the housing market in Texas that really make them fantastic tools and economically efficient. And the first thing I want to say is, and it's kind of obvious, but I think we should always, the first and foremost, remind ourselves that the most important thing MUDs do is provide safe, highly regulated, essential infrastructure. Once you get into conventional suburban development, you have to have, you can't have your own well, you can't have your own septic system, the lots are too small. So civilization, as we know it, requires safe water and requires safe waste disposal. Otherwise, you have a situation for which there's a term, and that term is colonias. If we don't want to have colonias, we need MUDs. And the fact that the infrastructure to provide that water, that sewer, that drainage is happening in a highly regulated environment is really key. And Julian Trey will talk a lot more about how that's regulated and why that's a good thing. I just also want to touch on the fact that not only are the legal and financial aspects regulated, the environmental aspects are also regulated to make sure that our systems are safe. So MUDs are a key tool for providing that infrastructure in that safe, regulated manner. The second point that I want to make is that municipal utility districts, of course, which they financially enable housing development that might not happen otherwise. As I said, civilization requires that we have that kind of infrastructure, so developers who want to build new housing are going to have to put that in. Well, it has to be paid for. A developer has to make a profit, or they're not going to engage in the activity to begin with. So the fact that MUDs are able to reimburse the developer down the line financially enables them to create housing that A, is more affordable, and B, housing and neighborhoods that are higher quality. Basically, the cost that the developer has to put into that infrastructure, because it's reimbursed later, they can put housing out to the market or allow lot development to occur and housing to get out to the market that's more affordable than it would have been. Because if the MUDs weren't there to reimburse later, the developers and the builders would have to get all their money up front in the price of the house. So that means that housing prices would be significantly higher. And if you think about it, one thing that Texas is notable for is the ability for people to get into their first house, have that entry-level housing built for them that's cheaper than a lot of other places. And if MUDs didn't exist, there's a whole price segment at that entry-level segment of the market that might just go away, because financially it just wouldn't be feasible for developers to bring that to the market. And furthermore, the financial resources that developers are able to get recompensated through the later reimbursements from the MUDs also allow them to put more financial resources into making the subdivisions, the communities better through amenities, through higher quality materials and other aspects that raise the quality of what you're able to get for the same price compared to elsewhere. And that's something that Texas has been known for, and it's something that's really key to our economy. And MUDs are a really central reason why that's possible. The third point I'd like to make is that, this is all great, but are you doing it in an unfair way? Are you putting the public taxpayers at unnecessary risk? And the answer is absolutely not. It is, even if developers are later getting compensated for putting in that infrastructure, it's the developer that still has to front the cost of all that when the development is initially getting put in. And it's up to them to perform, to execute that development in a manner that is going to be satisfactory to the market so that people buy homes and bring the assessed value into the community so that later the developer can be reimbursed. If the developer doesn't execute, that means they're going to be putting out the money for infrastructure and not get it back later. So this is a way of actually incentivizing them to do as good a job as they can to execute the development in a manner that is going to be successful. So the primary financial risk is really borne by the developer. And that's something that I think has been perhaps not necessarily well stated by the recent media articles. The fourth point I'd like to make is that MUDs are fair in another way, and that is that they're very self-contained. They're not putting burdens on anyone outside their boundaries, but they're also being able to control their own destiny. The folks who are being taxed, the residents who are being taxed to pay for that infrastructure, are the ones who are benefiting from that infrastructure. That is completely aligned. And if you're an economist, that's a really good thing. You don't like to shift what's called the tax incidence to folks who are not benefiting from what the taxes are paying for. So everything is completely aligned. And furthermore, especially as the communities gain residents and you shift from to an all-resident board, it's a completely locally controlled government. I mean, that's a big deal in Texas, right? Local control, that's something we really are proud of. And MUDs are one of the best examples of that. So from an economics and fairness perspective, MUDs is almost about as good as it can get. And I think that's also something that was not very well stated in the recent media articles. The last point I'd like to make regarding the housing market is that because MUDs are self-contained, they can proceed on their own path and on their own timing in accordance with the developer, who is also responding in accordance with the market demand for what they're trying to build. If the developer if MUDs didn't exist, and the developer still had to get in that infrastructure, they're either A, going to have to put that into the price of the home, as I said, thereby raising the purchase price of the home, or they would be at the mercy of other local municipalities to extend and provide infrastructure. And anyone who's tried to deal with a local municipality knows that it's rarely straightforward. You have every town or city is going to have a process that you have to go through, political process, bureaucratic process. It takes a lot of time to get developments approved. And if you're actually trying to get them to provide infrastructure, it's really going to take a long time. And that's the case that you see in some other states where that's part of the procedure you have to go through. So that slows everything down. And also introduce additional costs. And of course, for developers, time is money. And so not only would the cost of the infrastructure have to be potentially put in the price of the house, whenever you have a long, drawn-out approval and political process, that also has to get put in the price of the house. And furthermore, when you have times when there's a lot of local job growth, I mean, think of what happened in the Houston region from 2011 to 2014. We were adding up to 100,000 jobs a year. I mean, it was already tough enough to get enough housing on the ground, enough lots developed and housing on the ground in a timely manner to meet the needs of the market. Imagine if all those developers who were trying to meet the housing need that was occurring also had to go through local government to get infrastructure connected. That would have been, as much as housing prices went up during that time, imagine how the affordability crisis would have been so much worse if MUDs weren't in existence. So the fact that MUDs can act in a timely manner to respond to housing demand is one of the main ways that they enable an efficient housing market in Texas that keeps prices affordable.